Kususampo, and welcome to your UN House. Bhutan Dialogues is an open space for dynamic conversations on issues of national interest and with the objective to listen, share, and refine our ideas in pursuit of social progress. Since the last session, we have had the launch of the Bhutan Dialogues website and social media portals. On the website, you'll find our past sessions in both videos and podcasts. We will continue to update this website so that everyone has access to all the sessions. In addition, we hope that through this platform, we can reach out to all the educational institutions and citizens across the country. Coming back to our theme for today, which is local governance, what is the role of the CSOs? The concept of civil society organizations in Bhutan is relatively new. Yet, there has been rapid growth of CSOs in Bhutan after the advent of democracy, especially since 2010. Today, CSOs have become important partners in development. The role of civil society in local governance has become a popular topic. For many years, CSOs have been engaged in advancing citizens' rights. This change in perception of CSOs was certainly enhanced by the recognition His Majesty the King bestowed on the CSOs during the National Day celebrations in 2016 by awarding the National Order of Merit. The royal recognition has confirmed the importance of CSOs and the outstanding contribution made by them to nation building. Today, a new system of civil society has fully emerged, and there is a pervasive understanding that CSOs play a significant role in Bhutan's development, particularly in the remote and hard-to-reach areas. Our speaker today is Aum Tashi Pem, the Country Director of HELVETAS. Aum Tashi holds a master's degree in Policy Management and Government from the University of York in the United Kingdom. Aum Tashi enjoys reading children's books. She has written 3 children's stories: The Little Token, How Old is Karma, and My Friend Tashi. Aum Tashi is a mother of 3 teenagers. Our host today is Mr. Gerald Daly, the resident coordinator of the UN in Bhutan, as you all know. Mr. Daly comes from a farm in Ireland. He has worked with an NGO and 3 UN agencies. He has worked in 7 countries in 3 continents. He does his best to be a lifelong learner. Mr. Daly is married with 2 children. At the end of the session, you will have the opportunity to ask our speaker questions. If I may suggest everyone to keep their questions short and to the point. However, I assure you that longer questions will not just go home unanswered. If you have longer questions to ask, please feel free to catch hold of a speaker over a cup of tea after the session. I would like to request everyone to put up your mobile phones on silent. After tea, I would like to invite people to come back in here. We have Choing Jensen today, the founder of M Studio Bhutan, who will be presenting on how to be creative. Choing and his team at the M Studio helps young talents seeking their path into the world of music. In the process of making music and recording, M Studio also teaches young artists on ways of creativeness. It has been a knowledge hub to many aspiring artists. M Studio is also the founder of Bpop and has been the biggest contributor to the emergence of rap revolution in Bhutan. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you, and Tishtan.
Kususambola. Of course, it's quite difficult to fill Dr. Carmel Funso's shoes, but we have to try and do that this afternoon. We're very fortunate to have Tashi Pem from Helvetas with us. And as Sarin just mentioned, Tashi, I want to welcome you to your UN house. I'm going to probably start off with some easy questions, and, as usual, build from there. Can you tell us about Tashi Pem?
Yes. First, Kususambola, and good afternoon. I want to thank you and Lothan Foundation for having me here today, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. I hope it will be worth your while. I'm a development worker, as introduced, but I've also wanted to be a pop star children's book writer. I wanted at one point to become a teacher, but here I am, a development worker, and enjoying it thoroughly. And I guess when I look back, I think maybe the seed of that was planted when I was moving around all over our wonderful country with my family. I mean, we moved wherever my father's work took him. So we were in Tsirang, for example, in the south for a while. He was working in a project building irrigation channels. So we got to go to some of the remotest parts of Tsirang. Then for a while we were in Tashiangsi, and then we were also in Shimnam. So I guess these, I believe, are some of the most beautiful parts of our country now. And but also parts of the country where I saw a lot of differences between where I was born and grew up, and then where I spent much of my teens. There was a big difference. So I think the plant, the seed of wanting to become a development partner started from there. So as introduced, I have 3 teenagers. So a lot of my battles are at home. But I'm also very lucky to be in Helvetas. I mean, we do a lot of interesting work, I believe. Some of my colleagues are here, so I hope they'll agree with me. So yeah, that's me, I think. Yeah.
What inspires you to be the best that you are?
What inspires me? I think passionate people, hardworking people, courageous people, dedicated people. I think these are people who inspire me. For example, a few years ago, I went to a fashion show put up by a group of young people who saw that Memelaka was overflowing. So they decided to do something, and they made those gorgeous clothes out of plastics, out of all kinds of waste you can imagine. And then they put up a fashion show to make people aware of what was happening in Memelaka. And I sat there thinking, I would have probably made a PowerPoint to raise awareness on waste and plastics, but this was how they did it. I mean, that really inspired me. And also, my own family, my father, for example, he, like many others, had walked for days from their little villages in the mountains to the vastness of the Indian plains to get an education. And then my mother, I think she's never been to school, but when we were in Tashiangsi and non-formal education came there for the first time, she was one of the first people to sign up. So I think all of these people, ordinary people, they are a source of inspiration every day, all around us.
You mentioned that some of the colleagues from Helvetas are here today. As a leader of an organization and a team, how do you motivate others?
Firstly, I didn't force them to come. So I think I like to, and I hope you'll agree, I like to challenge myself and my colleagues. For example, we'll be doing a project, and then I would ask, so what do you think we should be doing 5-10 years after this project is completed? So just now we are in the middle of implementing, meeting deadlines, making sure money is spent by end of June, all of that. But once all that is over, what are your ideas that we should be pursuing something different, something innovative once this project is ended? So I think challenging ourselves like that motivates us, and also, of course, acknowledging hard work regularly, I think, is very important. Whether the final outcome is successful or not, acknowledging that people have put in a lot of hard work, put in a lot of passion in something, I believe keeps us all motivated.
Yes. So as I was preparing for today's interview, I got lucky. I reminded myself that the United Nations, in this instance UNDP, recently with the Parliament of Bhutan, came through with what is called the Bhutan National Human Development Report. And Tashi, you were the brains behind Chapter 5, Democracy and Development of Civil Society. And the depth that I see coming through in this chapter, the depth of experience, your depth of expertise, just comes through very, very clearly. And I recommend anyone who's particularly interested in CSOs and civil society, I really recommend them to read the chapter in this book. The rest of the National Human Development Report, of course, is very strong, but I find your chapter to be particularly strong. How can government ministries be more supportive to CSOs? Is an endowment fund enough, or can we ask for more? Can we hope for more?
Mm-hmm. I would say that in general, the government has been supportive. If we look at the frameworks that are in place, we have the Civil Society Organizations Act, passed in 2007. We have also the Cooperatives Act. There's also a Religious Organizations Act and other policies that I feel are not only regulating different forms of CSOs, but also providing the legal basis for these different forms of civil society organizations to firstly emerge, and then also to develop and grow. So generally, I find that very positive. But having said that, I think it must be the newness of the contemporary forms of CSOs that has also led to some questions, curiosity, which is good, about what these CSOs are. So I think more dialogue, more discussions, more partnership to build trust, to see what CSOs are doing would help in that respect. Something I also find is that when we start discussions on civil society, it quickly becomes a question on numbers.
Yeah.
So is there too many? Is there too little? What is the ideal number? There are also different perceptions on what are CSOs and what are CSOs supposed to be doing. So these are challenges sometimes that we face. But I think that we have to give ourselves time, and for a long time we've had the government and we've had the people, and then now we have private sector organizations, we have informal groups, youth associations, formal NGOs. So these are fairly new actors on the scene, and we have to give ourselves time and I think grow into partnerships with each other.
Yeah. Are international NGOs giving due regards to the local CSOs, or are they still mainly engaging with the CSOs that have royal patronage?
I can only speak for Helvetas. I feel that we have a good balance of partnership with the government, of partnership with various civil society organizations, and we define civil society organizations as not only the ones registered with the CSO authority, I mean, they are very important, but we also work with non-registered groups and associations. For example, recently I think we signed a contract with a non-registered youth group called Youth Advocacy Network, YAN. So these are also very, very valid members of our civil society. And more now, we are also engaging with private sector partners, especially in the vocational training side. There we believe that if private sector partners are not engaged, the quality of vocational skills building would not be as good as if you had the private sector engaged. So at least for Helvetas, I feel that we have a good balance, but need to do much more with the private sector partners. That's what I believe.
So many people these days are asking, what about LDC graduation? How are you preparing for LDC graduation? How are you supporting the country to be ready for LDC graduation? And I know that you yourself recently in the document spoke about how Renew and YDF have done some great policy work over recent years here in Bhutan. So I guess this advanced policy work is a great support to the country as it strengthens its capacity to deal with LDC graduation. What are the other activities CSOs can do here in Bhutan to help the country prepare for graduation?
I'm not very clear at the moment on how far CSOs have been involved in the discussions and decisions on our graduation from the status of a least developed country. But going forward, I strongly believe that the perspectives of civil society on the opportunities but also the challenges of graduating and then the post-graduation processes would be very important. If I were asked as a citizen, I would most probably ask to see if we have a transition plan, for example. Maybe there is one, but I haven't seen it. So if we were to develop a transition plan or a transition strategy, partnership with the CSOs, I believe, would be important because when you identify areas to focus on the impact of graduation, what could the government, the CSOs, the private sector do to better prepare for graduation and for after graduation? I think involving CSOs would be very crucial.
Yeah.
They would bring different perspectives to it, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what I hear you saying is, as the government develops and rolls out its transition plan, involving and engaging with the CSOs would be a key part of that process.
Yes.
Yeah.
That should be a key part of the process, and CSOs could probably also bring in perspectives of citizens. Maybe they could even bring in perspectives of local government, for example.
Yeah.
On this.
Yeah.
Yes.
You also speak very tellingly about the importance of civic participation in local governments. And you cite a number of examples, for example, the fact that the electorate, the entire electorate of Thimphu Valley should be involved in the election of the Trumpa. Are there any other specific suggestions you would have for us to strengthen civic participation here in Bhutan?
I should have read what I had written. We were in a village in Hala recently, and we were talking to a group of young people, and we were asking them, do you participate in the village zondos? Do you follow the deliberations in the Gewak Tsokdes and the Zongkok Tsokdos? And what one young person told me struck me. He said, well, what's the point? You go there, you listen to a few people speak, you come back, don't know for sure what has this led to. So I think a key determinant for civil society to participate in governance processes would be to find meaning and value added for the time that they have spent in participating. And Agap in Paro was also telling us that, you have to really almost, request people to come for Somdus, for village meetings, except if the topics are on land, water, and the registration of newborn children. So saying naturally, if the topic is something that is of priority to you and your children's future and your livelihood, that would be a second key determinant of whether you participate in these governance processes. So I think we have to keep those in mind if we are to talk about civic engagement in local governance processes. Because if we make the topics and if we control everything, it's not so interesting, even for me to want to go to participate in local governance processes.
So it's almost as if you anticipated my next question. Local governance reaches people at the grassroots level, and so do the CSOs. So how can the CSOs provide a platform to people to participate more? So the question is, what I'm really trying to get at is there a specific way CSOs can actually help strengthen this civic spirit?
I remember a quotation of His Majesty the King, and if I may paraphrase His Majesty the King, he said, local government is not the lowest form of government. Local government is the government that is closest to the people. And that also struck me because I believe that similarly for civil society organizations, some CSOs represent the interest of certain groups of people. Some CSOs represent the voices of their members, what we call the MBOs here. And some CSOs represent, or not really represent, but some CSOs keep alive topics that may not have gotten attention or may be forgotten. So I feel that gives them a lot of legitimacy to also be a conduit to represent civil society, individual citizens and their interests. So I feel that there are many roles CSOs could play to enhance civic engagement. One might be as a conduit, as a channel for information, where information has not reached people or has reached people in a format that is not understandable. So I find that would be a very useful role, and I have seen, for example, in Kenghar, in Mongol, a civil society organization which was breaking down and explaining the rules for getting the raw materials that community needed for all the mosques and the altars that they were building. So that I found very, because as a citizen we would like to participate in these governance processes.
Yes.
The quality of that would be enhanced significantly if you were better informed. So they can be this conduit for information. They can be very good facilitators.
Yeah.
We often hear a lot of complaints that community meetings are not so useful because people only come out with a long list of everything under the sun. So I feel CSOs could probably also facilitate these processes and support citizens to plan and prioritize and be better prepared when they then come face to face with their elected leaders,
Yeah.
or the Zonghak administration to present their priorities. Because what happens is, if you have a long list, the likelihood that it will be cut and chopped to fit the budget ceiling is high, and then you don't know which of your priorities remain and which not. So I think this is an example of where I think CSOs can facilitate these processes better, so that civil society citizens are better prepared to engage in local governance. And of course, the examples that you shared of bringing to the notice of policymakers issues that are facing citizens, I think that's also a very important role that CSOs can play, not directly citizen engagement, but bringing their issues. This last example, bringing their issues into policy discussions through stories, case studies, numbers.
Yeah.
As for example, Renew did when they were in the process of drafting the domestic violence bill. They had stories, they had statistics that they got in collaboration with the hospitals to see what was the numbers of mainly women who came to the hospital because they were victims of domestic violence. So I think all those roles are hugely important.
Yeah. So the reason I was asking this question was that I really feel that as we increase the amount of expenditures at the Zongkuk level to as much as 50%,
Yes.
this role of facilitation by the CBOs, community-based organizations,
Yes.
and the CSOs will become even more important than it has been. So I really feel there's an opportunity there. So I'm now going to get into a different part of our discussion this afternoon, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about general development. Tell us about Helvetas Bhutan, and why is it the most exciting, or why might it be one of the most exciting organizations to work for in Bhutan?
It is the most exciting. So, Helvetas, we are a development organization. We are a non-governmental development organization. And in Bhutan, Helvetas opened office in 1975. So, many years ago. And we are a part of a network of similar country offices spread across over, I think, 29 countries. In Bhutan, our, before 1975, there was a very important Swiss family, the von Schultes family, who were very close friends of our royal family, and that was how the first contacts between Switzerland and Bhutan had happened. And this and von Schultes, who was an industrialist, he initiated a pro-Bhutan foundation, a private foundation supporting all kinds of development in the country. And in 75, he and his family handed over these projects to Helvetas, and then we started. And later, of course, we got a lot of support from the Swiss government through the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, STC. So in the past, until a few years ago, I think agriculture was a dominant theme for Helvetas, and so was formal education, including teacher education, and a lot of suspension bridge building, because there was not a lot of farm roads, so communities were connected through these suspension bridges. And institution building, like investing in, for example, the colleges of education, so that we could train our own teachers, investing in the College of Natural Resources, so we could train our own extension experts. So institution building was key. These were very important topics, but then we developed. Bhutan saw a lot of achievements, like you were saying, leapfrogging in the education sector and a lot of other sectors. Very positive changes were happening. The context was changing. We became a democracy. New actors, as I said earlier, in the private sector, civil society were emerging. And then we felt a need to also move with the context. And therefore, what became important was programs on local governance, on local government. A lot of decentralization, as you said, had already started, was getting more intensive. So local government, supporting local government in that process, we felt was very relevant. And then, of course, civil society organizations, civic engagement, people's participation in self-governance, those were topics that became very important, and therefore that is also one area we're focusing on now. And then youth and specifically youth unemployment continues to be a concern for everyone. And we saw that probably investing in vocational skills development in what is called the TVET sector, the technical vocational education sector, became important. So exciting in the sense of, as I said, moving with these changing contexts. And Helvetas works in a very decentralized way. So when we saw the context changing and moving and the dynamics were changing, we also had the freedom to align ourselves and change ourselves, not only the topics but in the approaches and everything we could change. We could, we were given the freedom to change. So earlier working a lot with the government and then with these new actors on the scene, also working in a more multi-stakeholder way. So all of that keeps life interesting. And I hope my colleagues will agree.
So we live in dynamic times, fast changing times. We have the 17 SDGs, we have very fast rural-urban migration here in Bhutan. Some people would say we've come through almost a revolution in education. So when you think about great development over the next 15 years, and imagine you had the opportunity to make two big bets, two issues that you really felt were going to leverage us into what you just call leapfrogging, and you had to make two big bets, where would you put a significant chunk of your resources in two areas? If you had to just focus on two areas, what would they be?
Education, and by education I also mean skills development. So I think that is one area which is which clearly would be something that I believe in. I think investing in our human resources will never go wrong.
Yeah.
So that is one. The second one I think would be looking at issues we are facing today, would probably be in the sector of water, and water linked also to climate change, water management, because I'm not a water expert, but I believe we don't have a scarcity of water, but a lot of management issues around water. So if I were to pick, I would think investing in people and investing in this, in better managing this resource, especially with now with climate change and the global challenges that has also reached us.
Yes. So the background to that last question I should have mentioned was many people are saying that we are now preparing for a 2045 vision, or perhaps even further into the future. So I thought that these two seeds, we can be inspired by these two seeds that you have just planted. We have many young people here today, and some of them may be interested in interning. What's Helvetas's perspective on interning?
We welcome interns. We would like to take more interns than we are taking on at the moment. But sometimes we feel we have not been very fair towards the interns who come with a lot of expectations to Helvetas. Therefore, we have been a bit modest in the number of interns we have been taking in. So in the past, it was around 2 interns we would take in. We would generally have one with us here and one attached to a project in the field outside Thimphu. Lately, we have come down to just one intern per year. We normally try and have the same intern for a period of 1 year, because we believe that it takes at least 1 year for the intern to get something useful from us, and for us to also get something back from you. I think this two-way benefit, this win-win benefit for both sides is important. So, but we are highly positive towards having interns. In fact, we might soon be looking for one, especially to help us in the civil society program with our agent here. Mainly going to the field, interacting with community-based groups and organizations, collecting data, writing stories for us, success stories, not successful stories, all of those there. So we value interns highly.
Thank you, Michela. Colleagues, we have two more sections of questions to ask. We're adding a section, and the section that we're adding is interview questions. And the reason we're adding these interview questions is many of us will be going through interviews over the coming years, and we decided that Bhutan Dialogues to find out how some of the smartest, wisest people in Bhutan deal with the toughest interview questions. Tashi has agreed to respond to these really tough interview questions. But before we get into those tough questions around interviews, we're going to open it up for Q&A. And as we open it up for Q&A, I would ask that the microphone, put your hand in the air so that our colleague is able to bring the microphone to you. Please stand up. And as Seren mentioned earlier on, your question, the more focused your question, the more value you will get from Tashi's response. As you can see today, her answers are remarkably in-depth. And she's illustrating many of her answers with very practical examples. Tashi, I want to thank you for doing that. It makes my job so much easier. Having said that, please, anybody with a question, and introduce yourself as well.
Anything but my age and weight.
I promise I won't ask you the questions. Aum Tashi, thank you very much for your very profound reflections. My name is Azusa Kubota. I'm the new resident representative of UNDP. Thank you so much for your contributions to the National Human Development Report. And incidentally, the 2020 Global Human Development Report will be focusing on the very hot topic of inequalities. And I know one of the priorities of the current government is to bridge the gap in terms of access to resources in rural, urban communities, inequalities in terms of income, those who have, who don't, etc., at all levels. In your view, what are the key roles that the civil society can play in bridging the gap?
If you look at the majority of our CSOs here, they are focused on bridging the gap because they identify and work with, partner with some of the most difficult communities to get to in terms of service delivery. So a majority of the CSOs, they deliver much needed services to far off communities, to villages high up on the mountains, where national programs are not able to reach for various reasons. I mean, it's logistically, even for big national programs, to try and get to every little nook and corner of the country is difficult. So there are a lot of CSOs doing that, service delivery to hard to reach pockets of poverty in the country. There are also CSOs who work with specific groups who also again fall through the cracks of national programs. So the elderly, orphans, women who are disempowered, income generation activities for them, women victims of domestic violence, as I said earlier. So a majority of our CSOs are focused exactly on people, on communities, on topics that would otherwise either be left behind or would be very slow to reach where others have reached. So I think the nature of these civil society organizations are such that narrowing the income gap, the social gap, technological gaps, that I find the focus of a majority of our CSOs here. Yes. Scholarship programs, I think, as I said earlier, investment in education. So scholarship programs for those who may not otherwise have the chance to pursue high levels of education. So even that I feel is a very important investment in narrowing the the income, educational, technological gaps.
So following on from that last question on narrowing the gap, which of course is one of our core responsibilities at the United Nations, narrowing the gap, the UN, we often talk about leaving no one behind. And we know that the statistics on poverty show that Dagana and Shemgon and Munger, if I'm not mistaken, are in kind of the red zone in terms of what more can we do to help these particular zone cooks. Do you have any specific advice for those zone cooks that are furthest behind? Not just now people, but actual zone cooks. Any thoughts on that?
A majority of the people in the zone cooks are farmers. So I think rural development, a focus on rural development in the zone cooks would be, or should be, of high priority, I believe. And I also like the fact that we have in the government's grants disbursement formula an equalizing factor, in the sense that multidimensional poverty gets a high score. And that equalizing factor, I think, is very important to not only maintain but even bolster that if possible.
Yeah.
So rural development, connectivity is very important. And also these are zone cooks which are fairly remote. And therefore, if you look at mobile outreach, even in the poorest zone cooks, mobile outreach in the hands of our farmers is very high. So I don't know yet how, but probably if there was a way to make use of what people in these zone cooks have, to help them, to support them, to assist them in making use of that for, I don't know, for income generation, for example.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very much impressed by CSO's role, and in fact, I think I was also impressed that the moderator was questioning so provocative questions. Thank you very much.
My name is Dr. Fan Chung from the Royal University of Bhutan.
Very quick questions to you.
Yes.
During your introduction, you mentioned about the number of CSOs, whether it's high or low. Now we have a good number of CSOs supporting on the Bhutanese with the disabilities, whether it's young or adult. Now, according to you, do you think that we need to have those CSOs dealing on very specific, or is there anywhere where we can have one CSOs dealing with all with the disability? So this is first question. The second question is that when MC was telling that the very purpose of this Bhutan Dialogue is to reach even to the institutions. So therefore, my question to you is that how is the CSO, our civil society organization in Bhutan, look at the tertiary education establishment so that the CSOs and the tertiary educations in Bhutan can work together? Is there any views for this use? Thank you.
First question, I believe we can never have enough people and organizations working on this topic of special needs and disability. That's what I feel. I think I still feel there's not enough done, actually. And if you look at the CSOs working on this topic of special needs and disability, each one of them have a, for the lack of a better word, a niche. For example, Drakso focuses on the vocational side of equipping young people and children with different forms of disability to become self-employed. So that is the niche I feel Drakso has. Then there is the Ability Bhutan Society. We focus a lot on children with severe, moderate to moderate severe forms of disability, and they even go door to door offering their services, which I think is very good. And of course, they work very closely with the hospital, the Ministry of Health here, which is also important in the partnerships. Then we have the Disabled People's Association of Bhutan, TPEB. I see that a lot of their members are visually impaired, so that is their niche, if I may call it that. So we all try and deal with different issues and different challenges within this broad term of disability and special needs. So, of course, I think partnering between themselves, collaboration, coordination of efforts would be very important. But I still believe that each one of them has a very credible reason for existence in themselves, and so many on this topic.
And the second question, the relationship and how to strengthen the relationship between the academic community at tertiary level and the CSO?
One topic might be research. I think tertiary education institutes here have the expertise in that, which may or may not be in the civil society organizations. And the work of civil society organizations can become very strong, can be strengthened if it was backed by good research, which is a bit lacking at the moment. So probably this could be an area where tertiary education institutes could support civil society organizations in the minute. Research backed, and everybody looks for evidence. And CSOs, with all their good intentions, may not have that expertise. And second one is, I don't know whether there is, at the moment, courses at the tertiary level on, for example, civil society organization management or leadership or things like that. So if there were such courses, I think it would only strengthen, because many people now go into working with civil society organizations armed with their good big heart. But then at some point of time, it helps then to also have trainings and courses at the middle to tertiary level to better equip these people with very big hearts to perform even better. So I think that I would see as a second area of collaboration.
Excellent suggestion, Tashi. We know that in many other countries, universities, tertiary institutions do CSO capacity building. So it actually makes a lot of sense, your suggestion just now.
And tertiary institutes could benefit from the field experiences that the CSOs bring in, as your cases or your, you have these nice stories in boxes in the textbooks. So that would be a good combination.
This is Aloha. I'm from Hawaii. I'm a volunteer psychologist at the hospital for the last 3 months. My question is, because I got to see a number of young people who I have concerns about because they don't make the score to go to college. And I also see many depressive, psychological disorders with young people not being able to find employment or kind of going into a black hole. My question is, do you see there any future for community college development in Bhutan? Because I'm a professor for 40 years at our community college, and I see it as the bridge, with technical skill development and academics for those kinds of youth who don't fit on either side of just job and then academics. I also have a nonprofit which deals with youth at risk, helping youth at risk, and we developed a statewide program where students having problems in high school would come to our center, and I'd love to talk to you. It had sound recording, digital media, and culinary arts skill development. These are students failing, and they got to develop the skills, and they graduated from college with 12 graduate from high school with 12 college credits. So it's called early college. It's very widespread in the US now. And so I would like to know if there's any future of something like that developing in Bhutan in partnership with the Ministry of Education and CSOs, because we work very closely with nonprofits at the community college.
I was just asking Gerald if he could help me respond to that. So if he could kindly help me respond to that, and then I will try and add on, because I know what you do after your day job.
Thank you for this very important question. So earlier on I asked the question to Tashi, if you had two bets to place, where would you place them? And she immediately said, for the first one, education.
Right.
So, and then she explained it in a particular way. She spoke about it in terms of strengthening human capital, which I'm 100% aligned with. It's common sense. Now, what you have identified with is, you have identified a gap, right? And that gap, my sense is, it could get bigger. A section of our youth are going to grow increasingly into this space.
Yeah, I see it.
Possibly, right? So, because my view is the leaders of this country are very astute, the leaders of this country will find a way to respond to those needs. But we all have to recognize that you constantly have to make sure that what you're currently doing has quality before you try to expand. So it goes back to the challenges around, with limited resources, how do you prioritize? And as you may be aware, or you may have read in the newspapers, the new government has already committed to expand into grades 11 and 12. And we can imagine that's going to have some resource challenges. So we're dealing with multiple levels of resource challenges. So how do we prioritize? I do believe that one of the priorities, one of the opportunities to answer this question and similar questions will be as we develop the 2045 vision. Because the government in that process will be looking comprehensively across all of the various ministries of the country and figuring out where to place its big bets. So that's the best answer I could give to that question right now. But I do think in the follow-up, when we're having our tea and coffee and momos, I'm sure other people in the audience will give us the opportunity to brainstorm with you as well. Tashi?
Yes, I think alternatives. Just now you have the academic basic education, and then if you fail, then you get into vocational education, but nothing in between. So what you're raising is an important topic. The black hole that you're mentioning is an important topic, and there I think the NGO sector could also bring invaluable insights and contributions. Yes.
We have two questions now coming up. You know what? Why don't we take both questions together, one after the other? Please, Janet.
I'm Janet Schofield from RTC. And you mentioned that Helvetas works on TVET issues, sees them as very important, as I do. And the question I have is, what are the biggest challenges you encounter in your work in that area? And then going back to what Jerry just mentioned, how do you think the government's new policy on education, that is extending education to the 11th and 12th grade, what are the implications of that for the TVET sector? Thank you.
My name is Sonam Yangchen. I'm a second year student at Chimisingong School of Law. As an aspired lawyer in training, my question is, what a role a lawyer could play in CSO, a contribution a lawyer could make in CSO.
On TVET, it has the main challenge has to do a lot before young people get into these TVET institutions, because many young people that we have come across in the TVET institutes would have liked to do something else. They would have liked to pursue their academic education. They would have liked to find a desk job. They have so many dreams that do not include getting into a TVET institute. So we have a lot of young people in the TVET institutes for whom this was not the third or the fourth choice even. So that is one challenge we face. A second challenge we face is that there is not enough private sector engagement in the sector of TVET. So a lot of trainings, very good trainings happen within the institutes, which is a bit disconnected from the needs of the private sector, who are finally the employers of these young people. So these are some of the main challenges. And we are glad now to see that the Ministry of Education has in its plans already an introduction into TVET within the school system. So preparing young people before they are faced with no choice but to get into a TVET institute. So they are already oriented on the TVET system. They get basic orientation into that's the plan at least, basic orientation into the TVET system, and to have channels of getting into the TVET system before they are labeled as class 10 failures. You know, because at the moment you reach class 10 and if you have not secured the minimum cutoff point, then you get into the TVET institution. So preparing young people before they reach that stage and involving the private sector, I feel that these are, and connected issues around those are some of the challenges that we face. On the second question, which is more difficult to answer, so a personal perspective, and not of Helvetas, is that the good side is that children go to school each year at a very younger, it's getting younger and younger, the age with which children start school. In our time it was 6, and then we had to also see if we could reach the end of our year was one of the criteria before you could start school. So it was to ensure that you were ready for school. But now I think the children at 4 they start school, which means when you finish class 10, you're still 14, 15, probably. So the advantage maybe of increasing now basic education, may I say, is that you would probably get more mature people coming into TVET. Just now it's class 10. You know, if you don't make it after class 10, then you come to these TVET institutes, but now it would be class 12. So probably they would be better prepared for what is awaiting them in the TVET institutes. That might be an advantage, I feel. A challenge at the moment might be that you would not get enough students into the TVET institutes this year, you know, or next year even. Because when this policy was decided, probably the TVET institutes would not have been prepared, would not have been privy to this change in the policy. So they might this year get less students than they are prepared to take in actually. Yes. Which might even be advantageous again, because they also have a cutoff point of 40% score if you want to get into a TVET. So probably that would be lowered, and young people who would really then have the aptitude for TVET might get in. If the entry level score in the TVET institutes for this academic scores is lowered, you might then reach young people who would really need to be in TVET institutes. But these are all guesses because we haven't had time to see the effects of this policy yet on the TVET institutes. Yeah. I think for CSOs in general, engaging in policy dialogues, engaging on topics such as whether the law, the Civil Society Act, should be amended or not. These would really hugely benefit if they had a sounding board with a person like yourself with a legal background. That would be one. And more specifically, I have seen in other countries that a role that some CSOs take on themselves, an important role, is legal advice and legal aid, which we do not have as yet here. We have a senior citizens CSO with members from people with law background, so retired judges and retired lawyers make up members of the civil society organization. So they are trying to provide legal advice to people, vulnerable people who come to them, who may not see our formal court system as the first entry into getting legal redressal for the issues that they face there. So even on that front, I think legal aid, legal advice, awareness on what are the laws, that would be very crucial. Because I know that some CSOs like Renew, who give legal advice to people who come to them with all kinds of issues, they then have to depend on lawyers who are in other organizations, and the NCWC has been very, very helpful in that respect. So their lawyers support Renew in these aspects. So I think all of these would be areas where I would see someone with your background helping a lot.
Before I open it up for one last round of questions, I need to write it down.
Yes.
Madam, let me just add that I strongly recommend young people to volunteer with the CSOs here in Bhutan. I really strongly recommend it because it gets a little bit of dirt under your fingernails. And that practical experience, of course, very hard to say this in front of Dr. Pong Chung and the other colleagues from RTC and different professors. Practical experience is so important. It's so important. So colleagues, this will be the last round of questions. I'm going to take 3 people. I'm going to invite this gentleman here. I'm going to invite a colleague from the UN, and I'm going to invite this sir here, and Vishnu, because he's putting pressure on us at the back, I have to accept.
Thank you for the opportunity. So I am Aum Tashi. I'm working in the Department of Local Governance. In your talk, you was mentioning about many roles that the CSO is playing in building or developing local governments. So my question is, what are some of the challenges that CSO are facing to work between the central government and the local government? Thank you so much.
Vishnu, at the back.
My name is Vishnu. I am a youth. As you have mentioned that Helvetas is prioritizing in skills development, and if you look at our current scenario, we see that there are a lot of discussions around revamping the TVET curriculum in the TTIs and all. And for the fact that TTI graduates are not able to get jobs in the market, and what are some of the interventions that Helvetas is looking for to raise the game in skills development? Thank you.
I'm some reason. I'm also from the law school. But actually, I'm actually struck by what you told us about why you were inspired by the youth doing our program or coordinating fashion show about the Living Account program. So, as a CSO, what did you think of doing after you were inspired by those youth at the fashion show?
And finally, Juliet.
Thank you so much for your insights, very useful. My name is Julia Kenny, I'm a UNICEF Deputy Representative. I'd like to go back to the question around youth and what we can offer to them. And would like to know a bit more about apprenticeships. I believe Helvetas has been piloting it. As you will know, as a Swiss NGO, in Switzerland this is highly regarded.
Yes.
About 70% of young people do apprenticeships. And it has a very high value, and you can go anywhere from there, basically.
Yes.
I think that's the beauty. But what I would like to know is, what is your perspective on that? Do you think it has a future in Bhutan for the youth?
In the TVET sector, you mean? In apprenticeship in general?
Yes, in general, I think. It could be in general, but does the concept of apprenticeships, could it be an opportunity for Bhutan?
Challenges CSOs face working with central and local government. I think, as I said earlier, as a relatively new actor on the scene, CSOs are sometimes faced with questions of credibility, number one. I mean, okay, you want to work on this topic, but what is your credibility? Where do you draw your legitimacy from? These are certain sometimes questions that CSOs encounter. But also on the side of CSOs, I believe that establishing more partnerships with government partners, initiating partnerships with local government, with central government is important. For example, we have seen that a lot of CSOs inform the local government administration when they go to start a project in a Gewak or a Zonkak, or CSOs may go and seek technical support from agriculture extension agents or the livestock forestry extension agents to support their work. And I think these are really good ways of building partnership and trust and also credibility. I could see that probably CSOs could also invite government partners, members of parliament, to see what they are doing there, to see what they are doing. That can also lead to trust building, to establishing greater credibility and legitimacy for their work. But beyond information sharing and beyond seeking technical assistance, probably to overcome some of these challenges CSOs face, they could even co-create projects, I feel. You know, not just go and inform, but co-create projects with government partners would be a practical way of overcoming some of the challenges that they face. There's also, as I said earlier, a lot of curiosity about what CSOs are up to. I think that's good. I think curiosity is good. I think if nobody's interested in CSOs, then that's bad. But curiosity and what CSOs are up to is good. And you know, the CSO Act says that every year there should be a government CSO face-to-face platform. I'm not sure whether that has happened, but I've seen that sometimes when even ourselves, CSOs like us, when we prepare for such meetings, we are thinking along the lines of what issue should I raise and what complaints should I bring up and how will I get this redressed? So I believe that we could start with information sharing, what we are doing with central government, with local government. Also seeking advice on what we could do together. So starting with these topics, or at least combining these different topics, would also be a way of overcoming some of the questions and the credibility issues that some CSOs are faced with at the moment.
Vishnu.
Yes. On Tibet, TTI graduates not getting jobs. We did a small tracer study 2 years ago, and we found that more than 80% of the TTI graduates were employed there. Within within 1 year or so of their graduation from the Tibet institutes, which we felt was highly positive. However, on further digging, not all of them go into the trades that they are trained for. So they'd rather become, drive a taxi than to than to be a plumber, for example. So that is also there. It's a complex challenge, but one option that we see is to, as I said earlier, engage the private sector much more. That goes also in the line of your question. We are piloting something called DTP, Dual Training Program. That's the apprenticeship program, where we're trying to see if we can switch the ratio of 80% in the institutes, 20% in private companies to 70% in private companies and 30% in the institutes. Because the private sector companies are the final employer, so they know what kind of skills that they want. And secondly, we're also saying that government training institutes will have probably a tough time to keep up with the changes in the market. We have equipment in Kuruthang TTI that are from the 1960s, so, and then young people trained on that come out, join CTCL where they have modern machines. So we're saying, of course, one option is to try and then keep up with all the changes in the machines that is happening. But the other, we feel, better option is that if you do 70% of your training as an apprenticeship with the private companies anyway have those machines. So that is something we're trying to pilot, starting in a few trades at the moment, welding, carpentry and plumbing, and hoping that it would be replicated in other trades. So a framework has been developed, some course modules are being drafted, and then this will be launched in September, we are hoping, this year. And the third question was on, what did I do after I was inspired? So I was very inspired by that waste fashion show, but I must admit that I became more aware of Memelaka overflowing beyond its capacity. So I became more aware of that. And I've tried in small ways to reduce the waste that my family produces. I must admit, not with big successes, but we are trying at least to reuse a lot of the waste that we accumulate in the house. But I think nothing inspires us more than when young people are involved, frankly speaking. As I said, I would have done a PowerPoint presentation probably on Memelaka.
Actually, I wanted to know if, as a CSO, this is a very big problem in our country, the waste management.
Yes.
So as to mitigate this problem, I wanted to know if...
What we had brought in Memelaka. So we realized that this is a very pressing issue. So as a Bhutanese, I'm highly concerned about this topic. But as an organization, for us the flexibility to sometimes change the areas where we work takes longer than if we made individual choices within the family, for example. So we are focusing on certain sectors which unfortunately is not, waste management is not within the, because there are others who are doing a lot of good work and probably much better than we would have. But we are at this moment, as an institution, not in this topic. But personally, as a Bhutanese, I'm highly concerned about the waste that we are drowning ourselves in, especially plastics. I think partially answered your question. I think I feel that is the way to go, especially in TVET, apprenticeship, getting more hands-on training with private companies is the way to go. We have currently in the institutes practical training where youth learn how to build a wall, for example, and then it's dismantled so that the other group that comes in can then again restack the bricks and learn how to make the wall. Then the third group comes, dismantles it, and then it continues. But I think it's not the same as if you are doing a real wall with a private company at a construction site. Because there's a lot of dynamics around building that wall. Safety issues, there are working with others on the same wall. So we feel that is the way to go, and it does have a future. And it should have a future, especially in the TVET Center for Bhutan. We've been not doing enough of this. And actually, frankly speaking, traditionally, especially in carpentry, house construction, we had a strong tradition of master carpenters having apprentices with them. So we had this, the head carpenter or the master carpenter, the abzo that we, as we refer to him. So he would take in small groups of young apprentices that he would take along with him in the different construction sites. And they would really look up to him as the master, and he would mentor them. And you could really feel that he was the mentor over there. And he always got special side dishes during meals. And he would get a new go at the end of the construction. He was very highly regarded, this master crafts person. He would have apprentices with. And even in the monk body, I think we had this Tosetanigi. It was almost like apprentices. We would attach a group of young monks with the senior teacher. So I think that culture is there. It's nice to then mention that and not forget that and build on that.
Thank you. We're coming towards the end before the tea and coffee and momos. So rapid fire, as it were, questions.
Oh, there's more.
Interview questions. The first one is, imagine after this interview, you step out and you find a lottery ticket that gives you $10 million. The equivalent in Nostrum. What would you do with it?
I would leave the UN house premises as fast as possible. And, what would I do? I would save some. I would give away some, and I would live some, I think. So I would save some. I have 3 children, so I have to now prepare to save for their college education, so that would help. It would take a big load off me. I would probably improve the drinking water supply system in my village. It's terrible. I would probably invest in a fund for children and youth with different abilities. So that is the save some, give some, and live some. I think I would probably take my family and friends for Nepal on a vacation. On a vacation. And my friends and I, we go out from time to time, and then we always go Dutch. So probably I would, once in a while, sponsor the dinner. Yep.
This is a tough one. What was a situation you handled poorly in the past, and how would you handle it in the future?
I think I've had several situations which I handled poorly, on hindsight. One that remains with me is, we had an MTR, and MTRs can always be difficult, and it was an MTR on an agriculture project, which was the findings were very difficult for us. So my reaction was to full on be defensive and almost at a personalized level, defend and defend and defend. So on hindsight, I believe I could have handled that better. And then I got a chance, unfortunately, to handle it better recently with a similar review finding. But there, drawing from the lessons of that earlier story, I think this time I handled it a bit more objectively, a bit more distancing myself at first, taking a few days to digest it, and then to look at it with an objective eye. So that's what I did.
You seem to be hovering around what is called servant leadership a lot this afternoon. And even in your honesty and transparency just now in answering that question, you seem to be influenced by servant leadership. What do you understand by servant leadership?
Servant leadership. I think the two words at first glance look like antonyms, opposites of each other. Because some of us at least, when we think of leadership, we think of a big man sitting at the head of the circle and barking out orders at us. So, but that is changing, that notion is changing, and I think servant leadership is leaders who serve, but not necessarily wait hands and foot on the people they serve, but rather to encourage, to listen to different perspectives, to support their colleagues in doing better, and in envisioning the future of an organization or a unit or a country, to involve the colleagues, to listen to them, to be supportive in their growth and development. I think that would be, for me, servant leadership.
Many people, or at least some people, know that you are connected to a very famous song here in Bhutan, Hey Love. This was a song on many people's lips back in 2000. And you were a female vocalist, and some of my friends were saying, ask Tashi to sing it. I think that's a bit tough. I think that's a bit too tough. But what was the story behind the song?
I said earlier in my introduction that I wanted to be so many things, and to be a pop star was one of those. But I became a development worker, but that doesn't mean that you have to give up on all your other interests. So, so when a friend offered the opportunity to sing a duet with King Sonam Doji, I think you know him, he's a famous, well-known vocalist and musician. And incidentally, he's the head of a CSO. He's heading the CSO called Music of Bhutan Research Center. No? Doing a lot of interesting things. They document our traditional songs, those that are disappearing. So that was a chance that a friend offered, so I went. There was a studio, Atta Asia studio, behind the vegetable market down. And then we were there, and then the technology is so impressive. This was a duet, and I never met King Sonam Doji when doing the duet. So he did his part, and he had left. And then I went and did my part, and then someone very seamlessly put it together. And of course the theme is love. I think, what else would you sing about?
Cool. Back in 2009, that's a long time ago perhaps, you wrote the following: Death, Buddhists believe, is not the end of life. It is the beginning of another journey, whose path is designated by the way you have led your past life.
Yes. Where did you find that from? I'm very curious now.
The title is Waking Up in the Realm of the Gods.
Yes.
So my question is, what is your own personal spiritual practice that works for you?
So what Mr. Daly just quoted was from a short article I wrote when my younger brother died. So we wanted very much at that time to believe that he would come back again, and therefore we hung on to this belief in Buddhism that we always come back, unless you're enlightened and you leave the circle of life. So yeah, that was what helped my mother especially to get through this very difficult time. So that was when I wrote that. Spiritual practice, we have a little routine in the house every morning, where my mother makes the fresh water offerings at the altar, and she also lights some incense sticks, and then we have a little machine that plays some prayers in the altar room, and I find that a very soothing way to start my day. And my first task is to boil a big pot of tea for the whole family, and then I have all this, the smell and the sound and of the prayers, but also of my mother offering the fresh water. So all of that I feel helps me start my day on a very calm note. And I strongly believe that how you start your morning has an effect on the state of your mind for the rest of the day. So that is one spiritual practice that I regularly engage in. And even that pot of tea, the first helping, we have a little balcony behind the kitchen, so the first helping then is offered in the different directions, and that ritual is also very important for anyone in the family who's doing that. And there you, while you're making the tea offerings, you're also seeking support for the day to help you carry the load for that day. So we also have a small short prayer that my mother taught me.
What are the 2 books that have influenced you the most, and why?
I think you have very kindly photocopied the cover here. One is Sikkim, Requiem for a Himalayan Kingdom, and I'm sure many of you have read this. I think it brings to life it brings to bear the vulnerability of a little landlocked country in between very strong superpowers, economic powers. So this sends home a lot of messages. So I would recommend that if you haven't read it, you should read it. The vulnerability of one's geography, of history, of a small little landlocked nation. I think it highlights through the tragic story of one man. I think all these realities are brought to life, and it's not fiction, unfortunately. So I could relate a lot to this book. I would recommend that you read it if you haven't already. The second one, my favorite, is The Story of Ferdinand. It's a children's book. It's about a bull in Spain who refuses to fight, the matador. So he is a big, nasty-looking bull, but his favorite pastime is to sit under a tree and smell the flowers. I really like this book. It speaks to me. It speaks to me. Yes.
Excellent. So we're coming to the end. What remains for me just right now is to offer you 2 small memories from today. Not gifts, I think they're memories. The first one is, of course, a thank you from UN Bhutan and the second one is, given that all of us who inhabit our planet are invited to work on the SDGs, the only roadmap for our planet, I'd like to offer you a...
Thank you very much. When I saw the envelope, I thought it was the 10 million.
Colleagues, before inviting you for tea and coffee and momos, let me remind you that we'll be breaking for around 15, 16, 20 minutes. And then we will, those of you who are interested, please come back in for a really exciting add-on session today with our colleague from Studio M.
Thank you.